gonna have you do, Andy, sit right here, and you're gonna hit the this arrow for me, okay?
Got it. All right, thanks for everybody for coming in today. Apologies for the technical difficulties. It's good to see a crowd of people eager to learn a thing or two about catfish. I figured this would be a great time and place to share a little bit of knowledge that I've acquired over the years of my time on the water, and I hope you learned something out of it. Feel free at any point in time, if you have any questions, raise your hand, I'll stop. Otherwise, I'm just gonna rant and go on and on and on, because I'm very passionate about the art of catching catfish, not only for their size, but they do taste pretty good if you decide to cook some of them up. Not a lot of people catfish compared to trout, walleye, and bass fishing, but that's changing. A lot more people in the United States are targeting catfish than ever before. So welcome, thanks for coming, I appreciate it. Next slide, please. Before we get going on any further, I'd like to express my gratitude for Outdoorama for not only just having me, but also the people at Whisker Seeker and Catfish Pro for donating a bunch of freebies and giveaway stuff that I have. So if you're feeling lucky, feeling nice, come up to me. If you ask me a question, you get a prize. Got a lot of good stuff donated by them. And outside of today, if you are looking to purchase catfishing tackle, Whisker Seeker and Catfish Pro, they make very good stuff. Now, we're gonna start with a biology lesson. Now, with the anatomy of a catfish, skinfish have been around a lot longer than spiny fish, fish that otherwise have scales. Catfish don't only have taste buds around their mouth and whiskers, they have taste buds throughout the entirety of their body, even towards the back of their tail. Now, the consistency of taste buds per millimeter varies across the range of the fish itself. Towards the mouth and the whiskers, that's where there are going to be much more taste buds than compared towards the back of the fish. They're a product of survival in the widest array of environments, and they're here for a reason. Skinfish have been around a lot longer than other fish, and that's the reason why they're able to survive in a wide variety of environments. Now, whether it be real turbid, muddy water, clean water, whether they're eating stuff off the bottom or chasing live bait, catfish, they are masters of survival. They're not as finicky or easy to diet as trout. They're very tough, they're very hardy fish, and they have taste buds all around their body. So sometimes when you're fishing and you're using a bait that's scented, in order for that fish to find the bait, they'll bump into your line and almost follow it down. So maybe next time you're catfishing, pay attention to that. Also, with their lateral line, in the same way we as humans and mammals can feel air on us, fish can feel water differences on us, or fish can feel water differences. So if something's moving in the water, they're able to feel that. That's why sound works very well. And if we look at this graph provided by In-Fisherman, their catfish are able to hear a wider range of frequency when it comes to bait kicking around the water and stuff causing a commotion. Next slide, please. A little bit about me. Oh, back one. A little bit about me. I've been targeting catfish for over 15 years now. I'm a writer and a YouTuber. In my day job, I wish I was a catfish guy, maybe someday. I'm a therapist. I specifically work with addictions and domestic violence, which is why I have me in one of my, how I would dress going to work holding a fish, and then I have this t-shirt that I found on the internet. I'm gonna buy it one of these days. It says, "The worst day of fishing beats the best day of court-ordered anger management sessions." And I find that hilarious because Monday evenings I do an anger management class. So that's enough about me. Let's get jump started into the catfish lecture. We have two kinds of catfish in the great state of Michigan. We do not have blue catfish. While channel catfish look blue and they resemble a blue cat, they are not blue catfish. They're totally different species. Blue catfish don't fare so well when it comes to colder water environments. We have the mighty flathead cat and the channel catfish. And we're going to get into the specifics and the differences amongst the two of them, but I wanted to show you side by side a little bit about each one of them. They both taste pretty good. They put up a fight. They're fun to catch. It's just, when you're going catfishing, don't say you're going catfishing. Go out and say I'm targeting channel cats or I'm going flathead fishing. They're different things. You'll catch both of them in the process of being out on the water, but it's totally different between targeting one thing or another. And just a little tip to keep in mind, if you're targeting flatheads and you're catching channel cats, that's generally assigned to move locations. Flatheads tend to be solitary creatures. They're alone, they're by themselves. Maybe they're around other flatheads, but very rarely they actually mix. Next slide, please. Major differences, the channel catfish and the flathead. The flathead has a flat head, obviously. It has a massive lower jaw. They have very big mouths for their size. Channel catfish, they have smaller mouths and they're more angled down. The channel cat is built for picking stuff off of the bottom. There are some situations where the channel cat will suspend and come up to feed on bait, but it's totally different compared to the flathead, where a flathead is much more solitary, like I said earlier, but the flathead will sit in a hole or relate to structure and wait to ambush their prey. If we look at the tail, the flatheads, it's wide and it's flat at the end. It's meant for swimming in sprints, short, quick bursts to come out of wherever they're hiding and nab themselves a bait fish. While the channel cat, it's got a forked tail. It behaves a lot more like a walleye when it comes to just swimming around and movement. Channel cats, they move around a lot. Flatheads, they're very solitary creatures. And they're very much homebodies. There's some research out there in Fisherman published a couple of years ago. Flatheads will live in certain sections of the river throughout the year. And throughout a majority outside of the winter, the same fish can be found within roughly the same mile or so of, for the most of its life. Anything else I'm missing when it comes to that? Now with that being said, if you ever hook into a flathead in Smith Park, a lot of your catfish spots, especially from the shore, once the water gets warmed up, they'll choke up with weeds and it makes it a lot harder to fish. So we're going to talk a bit about location, where to find them, and what to look for. Next slide, please. We have several powerhouse cat fisheries in the Great Lakes region. Starting down here, we have the tributary, we have the Grand River and everything that it entails. Up high on the left, we have the Kalamazoo River. And then in the center, that's where I fish most of the time. That is the Saginaw Bay watershed. That's where I fish maybe 90% of the time. And over on the right in northern Ohio, there is the Maumee River. I'll get down there a couple of times a year. But for the most part, when it comes to consistently target catfish, whether they be flatheads or channels, your best bet is going to be fishing in the lower half of the lower peninsula. The further north you go, the more sparse and far and few in between they're going to be. I'm not saying they're not going to be up there, but it's probably not very likely you're around Mackinac City and you have a 30 fish day or a 50 pound fish. So while you find them here and there and around, but these are 5 examples of some of the best cat fisheries, not only in the region, but also across the board in the United States. Next, please. Seasonal movements. Winter staging areas, they're out deep and away from the shore. As spring comes, the water warms up. And I'm gonna come over here, this up. So this is my local body of water, the Holloway Reservoir. I live up in Columbiaville, Michigan. Now, the northern end, where the river dumps into the reservoir, it's quite shallow. There isn't a whole lot up there. It's a lot of dead water, this time of year at least, when the water's cold. In the wintertime, those channel catfish, the Holloway only has channel cats, they're going to be hanging out in the deeper water relating to contour and following bait around. In the wintertime, they don't have to eat a whole lot. And when spring comes, the water warms, look for the shallow areas that are close to where you believe they're going to be hanging out in the wintertime when the water's cold. Look for changes, follow the river curve, the old river channel, maybe even where you are. Navionics, does everybody know what Navionics is? Fantastic app to have on your phone. So you'll be able to see where the depth changes are. Am I casting out into 30 feet of water or 5 feet of water? It can make the world of a difference. So I highly recommend downloading that for people and doing a little bit of exploring on your app before you go out, so you get an idea. And whenever you go out fishing in general, one of the big objectives is to just learn. Even if you don't catch anything, at least you've learned how not to catch them. Maybe we're going to tweak our approach, tune our rigs a little bit, do things a little bit differently. Going out there in the early season, they can be very nippy and slow to start, but it's only going to get better and better as the springtime comes in. And once the water warms up beyond, mid 50s, low 50s, those channel catfish can be still caught in the lake, but they'll start making their way upriver into like drainage ditches and farm creeks. And I've got some pictures coming up to share with for a later pattern where you'll see that. Next slide, please. Early season, look for the warmest water. Small temp change can be significant. If it's a 2 or 3 degree temperature change, that's not a whole lot to us, but to a fish wanting to be as comfortable as it can and looking for the first life of the season, the first plankton, the minnow, the crayfish coming out. That's where they're going to be going, not only to get their metabolism and their engines roaring, but also to find some food. They're not too far from winter holding areas, and can you go back to recent slide? You'll be able to map their path. So in the early season, they're going to be out in the big water. And this is just an inland lake example. For the rivers connecting towards the Great Lakes, they can be in a winter pattern in the main river, just where they're hanging out. They're not all going to go out to Lake Erie or Saginaw Bay or Lake Michigan, wherever it's deep and wherever they're comfortable. Next slide, please. So you'll be able to map their path. Like we caught them in the early season here, then when the water we caught them more upriver, and then 2 months later in the middle of the summer, we were catching them out in the middle of farm fields. This is very much founded around contour and structure with consideration. If we look at this picture up here, we call that the landmine where I'm from. On the reservoir, the water goes down quite a bit, and 150 stumps easily will become visible. You're able to walk out and get to some spots that aren't accessible on other areas throughout, or other times of the year. That's very shallow, 2, maybe 3 feet of water, but it's loaded with stumps. So the bugs, the minnows, or I say bugs as in crayfish. The crayfish are going to be moving, the bait's going to be hanging around, and the water's going to be comfortable. We don't like eating a buffet or an Easter dinner in a really, really hot room. We want to be comfortable, and so do the fish. And they'll be around areas like that. You don't have to be fishing deep. They're going to be more shallow than you think. And this is a picture of my friend Rob. We caught that one in a river channel, not too far off of the main lake. Pretty early in the season. If you look at the growth behind him, this might have been late March 4 years ago, and that one went 14 pounds. It's very big for an inland body channel catfish. So early season, this is what we're looking forward to within the next couple of weeks here. I think Tuesday's going to be I think Tuesday actually might be 60 degrees. So it's never too early to be thinking about, getting your stuff together and getting a plan of action going. But this is what we're coming into right now. Next slide, please. Now I mentioned earlier about fishing real skinny water, far up into the headwaters of, whatever river system you're in. Like over here on the left, that's in the middle of nowhere. You kind of had to go looking for it, but it's a creek that was just deep enough, 3, maybe 4 feet deep, and I set up and, I caught that channel cat there, and I've caught others there before too. But those fish, in the early season, they're all congregated, they're all hanging out. And then once the water warms up, the party's over, and they spread throughout the river system, and go where they feel called to. This creek is maybe 14 miles away from the main lake. They've got nothing but time to cruise upriver and find themselves a home up there. Anywhere they feel comfortable. We have more pictures here. Even in the dirtiest water, you can catch channel catfish, or flatheads for that matter. And especially in the summertime, if we get a lot of rain, sometimes it gets them fired up. It sends a lot of current down, it stirs up the bottom, the bait's moving around. It can change a spot from being like this bank right here when this water was high. This water was 3 foot high when I took this picture. And normally that spot will give me 1 or 2 fish if I'm sitting there for maybe a half hour. But on this day, I caught maybe 6.5 hours. Just the water came up, it was a big change. They're able better, pick up on some bait and go for it. And I've got another picture down here from when it was flooded upstream from this spot a little bit. It looks like chocolate milk, but it works very, very well. It doesn't matter if it's clear, they're not like walleyes or bass. They're using all of their body along with their eyes to find their next meal. This is a run and gun approach style of catfishing. Spots like this, unless you're hunting for a really big fish or night fishing, I'll give a spot maybe 20 minutes or so, and then move on to the next one. And the more familiar you become with a river system, the more spots you're going to be able to have. One of the best things that can make you a more successful angler is time on the water. So if this spot right here isn't holding up or gave me a few fish and then it died, then I'll come over here, see what happens there. If that slows down, we'll go to this spot. So you'll be able to work across the river and down to wherever you plan on ending up throughout the day. You know, sometimes fishing, you know, I'll hit 8 or 9 spots some days. But it's very much, give it 15, 20 minutes, and that's probably on the higher side of it. If they're there, they'll let you know, and you know, they're hungry, they're gonna go for it. Next slide, please. Now, in the autumn months, it's a bit like spring, but reversed. So it's bait focused. There's still fish going to be all over. The water's going from a warming point down to a cooling point. So as the temperature, you know, decreases, you know, you're going to be working yourself and your approach closer to where you believe their wintering holes are. We got a creek right here. This would be good until maybe the water hits 50 degrees, and then I'll go out and fish the larger part of the river. And then in this far photo right here, that's that landmine spot I was telling you about. It looks like it's springtime out there, but that was a week before Thanksgiving a few years ago. And there becomes a point where you catch them real good, and the next time you go out, it's kaput. It's totally out. Those fish are, you know, coming back down from up top, you know, making a stop through there, eating, and then they're on their way. You know, think of those spots as like a train station or an airport. They're just there temporarily doing their thing until they got to get moving again. So remember, you know, in the springtime, you know, you're fishing up and away from where they're hanging out in the winter versus the autumn where they're coming back home. Next slide, please. Things to look for. This is, the next few slides are about structure. Bridges. Whenever you drive over a bridge or around a bridge, you see people fishing, right? One of the best, they have the best of everything. Oftentimes with bridges, there are massive contour differences, there's structure, sometimes crazy structure. Like, I know some, like this bridge specifically right here, people have pulled lawnmowers out from there. And you get some wild stuff around bridges, but you get really big current blowouts there. Bridges oftentimes are really good choke points. They offer riprap shoreline for crayfish and minnows to hang out around. You have the support pylons themselves where fish can be hanging out around, waiting to ambush prey. And also, the bridge itself is a very big current break where the water will be flowing through and they'll just be sitting right outside of the current where it's nice and easy. When they see something coming by, they're able to come out and ambush it. You got a little bit of everything with the bridges. Just the thing with the bridges, not all of them are super easy to fish. If we look at the upper right-hand photo, that is the bridge I learned how to catfish. When they rebuilt it, they filled them with rocks on the side, so it's very hard to fish nowadays. But from a boat, it is gravy, you know, because those fish are going to be patrolling up and down through there, looking for crayfish, looking for minnows, looking for bluegills, whatever it is that they want. As like an on-ramp for an expressway. There's a lot going on and a lot of places to go, maybe a place or two to stop and eat, but someplace those fish are going to be visiting sooner or later. There will be days where you go out, especially in the springtime, this bridge might do really good this week, but 2 weeks later it's dead because they've all gone past that third bridge. Very time-oriented. Once again, if you're out there in the daytime, not only play with where you're putting your baits, maybe put one deep, put one in the middle, and then one shallow and see it from there. But after, like I said, you know, day fishing, Give it 15, 20 minutes or so, and you will be able to know whether or not to pack it up and go to the next spot or not. Now, all these bridges are within, oh goodness, 5, 10 minutes away from each other. Yeah, they're all very close. So, you know, mapping their path. That's the name of the game when it comes to this approach. Seeing where they are. Next slide, please. Another thing to keep in mind when it comes to structure, timber. Catfish love hanging out around structure in general, especially wood. Because if we look in this upper left-hand photo, that's an uprooted tree on its side. This was the early season when the water was down. So with all those nasty roots around through there, when the water's high, those fish are going to be hanging out around it, under it, and inside of it. Those catfish will get inside an old log cavity if given the chance. In the middle photo, that's not too far from my house, we call that the jungle gym. It is the mother of all log jams. And I'll pitch my rig right in front of it. Those fish will smell it because the current's blowing down into their face. They'll get the bait and I'll pull them out of there. When you fish in a piece of structure like that, you're going to get a couple of fish off of it, and you know then it's time to go. Everybody's home. Everybody got a piece to eat. But if you're fishing, you know, a larger field, you know, like that picture all the way to the right, the stumps, you know, that's a fish highway where they're moving through. There are a lot of stumps. There's a ton of water those fish are going to be swimming about. So things to keep in mind. We went over bridges, we went over timber, and then we're going to talk about, next slide please, contour. We all know river and lake depth vary. Consider this heavily when you're targeting catfish. Use this as my pointer so I'm not in the way. We've got an island. We have a confluence there where maybe we have a main river channel and then a creek dumping in. It doesn't have to be a little creek or a little drain. This could be, you know, where the Tittabawassee meets the Saginaw, or where the Cass River meets the Shiawassee. It doesn't have to be small, it doesn't have to be big. Any differences make the world of a matter. Right here in the middle, we have a river bend. Now on the inside of this river bend, maybe 2 feet, but on the outside, maybe 5 or 6. Now that's a huge difference. If a fish is sitting on the outside of the hole where it's shallow, that water's going to be coming over there a lot faster. But on the outside of the bend, it's going to be deeper, they're going to be able to hang out down in there, and the current's not going to be as bad. And they'll be able to sit there and wait for baits or food, their next feeding opportunity to come in, and they'll be able to swipe it. And I included an avionics screenshot over here. This is an example of a creek dumping into a major river here in southeast Michigan. It's the variation, it's the difference. This river's pretty bare, there's a whole lot of nothing but that. Think of that as an exit and off ramp, or on and off ramp for fish to be coming in and out of looking for their next meal. Now, there's a lot more to, you know, just pitching your bait out there. It's why you're putting it out there. And around the island here, towards the shipping channel, it's very deep. But the closer you get to that island, you know, it's going to be loaded with structure a lot of the time. Sometimes boats are moored to it, like tugboats and barges, or timber, for example. I'll be showing you some fish we pulled out of timber up there. You know, find anything that's different, because that's where the fish are going to be hanging out at or coming to. Next slide, please. Talk about the channel catfish. Fun for all people and readily available. The Michigan State record channel catfish is 40 pounds. That is a tremendous channel catfish. It was caught twice, actually. They don't know if it was the same fish or not, but in 1960, the record was broken, 40 pounds, and then in 64, it was tied again with 40 pounds out of Houghton Lake in the early 60s. Whether or not it's the same fish, we can't prove it, but that's a monster channel cat, and that record probably won't be broken soon. You know, in our last slide, we looked at that river bend there. This is my cousin George. We caught maybe 8 channel cats just around that bend right there, and all in a matter of like an hour, putting the bait where we know those fish are going to be hanging out at. And earlier I showed you a slide where the water was really high and my rods were out, and that was when I couldn't keep them off my line. You know, this is an example of, you know, I was catching 2 of them at a time, sometimes catch 3 of them at a time. When they're in and they're hot and heavy. That's my beautiful fiance, Sarah. She was out with me last spring, We were fishing around the stumps, and she caught some of her first channel catfish that day. And then on the right, we have my buddy Chris. We were up in the Tittabawassee a few years ago, and that channel cat might have been 15 pounds, which is a very big channel cat. It's not a state record, but very few channel cats get to about that size when you're on the water. That's not an everyday occurrence, but I wanted to make sure to include a variety of differences in our approach on how channel catfish are targeted. Next slide, please. Connected to the Great Lakes, we have Magnum channel catfish. Big water, big fish. You get a lot of really good opportunities living in Michigan. People think, if you're targeting catfish, you gotta be in Tennessee or Alabama or South Carolina or Kentucky. The Great Lakes has some very big catfish. Now, these two are both double digits. This one went 12. The Saginaw River connects to the bay, and this was the Huron River that dumped into Erie. You're not going to catch a lot of giants like this, but they are out there, and I want you to be equipped if you ever decide to go out and fish some of these spots, looking for a real big one. Cut bait works really well. We'll talk a bit about bait and opportunities with that in a couple of slides here, but channel cats, they range. You can catch a bunch of them that are a foot long, or you can catch a few very big ones. Next slide, please. More on the Magnum channel catfish. We got my buddy Dennis on the left here. Two very big ones connected to a river on Lake Erie. And we got my buddy Andy, same area, just absolute slobs. Bigger channel cats, they don't school up a whole lot. They're solitary, they're by themselves. When you're catching, a couple of them at a time, oftentimes it's a seasonal movement, looking for warmer water and chasing bait. You see how he's all dressed up, because it's early season and it's cold out. A lot of those fish were coming in that day. Well, it was early summer, right?
It was about early summer, yeah.
Yeah, you caught that giant one. Put that one away.
I think that one was pushing 13.
Is it?
I'll say 13, 14.
It was a toad, that's for sure. So anywhere your water dumps into Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, or Lake Erie, you've got a chance of running into a very big channel cat. And boy, oh boy, do they fight hard. Not only do they taste good, they fight very hard. And they almost become a different animal when they're that big. Their teeth become a lot more pointed. They thrash a lot harder. They pull more drag than you think they would. They know what they're doing. They don't get big by being dumb, that's for sure. Sometimes you gotta be a little bit finicky when it comes to their baits, and we're gonna talk about baits in a moment here, but Michigan has some fantastic opportunities for targeting big channel cats as well as eaters as well. Next slide, please. Looking at channel catfish tackle, almost anything goes. If you have, Papaw's rod and reel combo sitting in the corner of the garage, that can more than likely catch channel catfish. Now, just be prepared for big fish or circumstance. And what I mean by circumstance is, if it's very stumpy and you got to horse a fish out of there, you're not going to want to do that with your regular walleye jigging rod. You're going to want to put some muscle down into them and put your back into it a little bit. Medium heavy rods, you use a spinning or bait casting outfit. Line, they're not too big. Catfish are not line shy. 10, 20 pound mono would work. Braid at least 30. The reason why I say go for the bigger braid, since braid is a lot smaller than monofilament, it's easier for it to develop weaker tendencies when fished around certain pieces of structure. So for example, on this reel right here, this might be 50 pound high vis braid, but it's the size of a 12 pound mono. It's very strong, but if it rubs up against some things, it can break very easily. So I wouldn't bother going with a 10 pound braid that's very small. It's like dental floss. You'll break that on rubbing up against a branch or a rock or something. But I'd do at least 30 and still be kind of cautious about it. Most of the time when I'm targeting channel catfish, I'll just use mono. I fish around a lot of concrete, a lot of stumps, a lot of timber. And the mono holds up better. It's, mono meaning one, and filament, strand. It's one piece of nylon. It can hold up to the beating a lot better. You can use a circle hook, you can use a circle hook, you can use a KO hook, or your regular J hook. When I was a kid, We would just use like regular walleye jigs, put worms on them and cast them out there, and that would work. They're not picky by any means. And that, you know, going back to the line deal, I use a lot of high-vis line because I'm fishing at night and I need to see, you know, the strike or like subtle movements. You can tie bright orange or bright green line all the way down to your hook, and that's not going to throw the fish off. They're not line shy. They're not like steelhead. They're not like walleyes. That's something that took me a while to get over. I was very detail-oriented for a long time, where, you know, I wanted everything fluorocarbon. I wanted it to look as natural as possible. But after a while on the water, it doesn't make a difference. I've caught probably more catfish using, you know, yellow or green leader line than I ever had with clear line. Also, you know, that comes with time and experience on the water, but they're not line shy. Swivel, you know, just you know, a regular swivel you can get from anywhere. You probably got these lying around. These break at about 50 or 60 pounds. These will do just fine. And if you're fishing with dip bait, I've got an example of dip bait right here. It's not super appealing stuff. It's pretty stinky. This is made by a company in Farmington, Iowa. It's called Triple S. This is the blood flavor. Looks like poopy toothpaste. It doesn't smell too great. And you know, you warm it up, and you know, I got my stick in there. You place your dip bait's tube or sponge, that's what that is up there, into the dip bait. And then you take your line, you pull it out, and you got a big old stinky glob of it. Now, channel catfish love this stuff, especially the smaller ones. Probably the smaller ones more than the bigger ones in my opinion. But with dip bait, and especially in current situations, you are going to want to put this on every 15 minutes or so. There's a common 15-minute theme when it comes to targeting catfish, because you know, this stuff, it's like paste, and once it's underwater, it's going to be dispersing scent and blowing around, and it's going to be washing itself off. And when you're reeling it in, sometimes if I'm dip bait fishing, I'm going to pick that rod up, I'm going to reel it in as fast as I can. So all of the dip bait that's left on that tube, you know, washes itself off. Then I can put that plunger back in there and get, you know, a good fresh glob going on. A lot of people start by catching channel catfish, whether they're targeting them or not. Fantastic table fare. They get very big. And we're going to talk about bait next. Next slide, please. With our official baits, I got a few up here for everybody to check out. We have the Catfish Pro cubes. Team Catfish makes the fiber nugget. That's a real good one. And that third photo up top, that's an example of dip bait as well. And this is something that took me a little bit of a while to get used to, or at least accept that it's okay. Because when I heard of people using cut up hot dogs or chicken breast marinated in Kool-Aid or Jell-O, I thought that was the most hillbilly stuff I've ever heard in my life. But it works. It just works. It's very dirty, but it works. You know, it'll stay in your hands pretty good. You can tell it's that time of year because, you know, for the month of May and June, my hands will have like a red or blue pigment going on. No matter how much I wash them, there's always that, you know, color to them. Cheap hot dogs, maybe $1.50 pack of, you know, whatever kind of meat they throw in those casings, and, you know, 50 cents at the Dollar General for your Kool-Aid powder, and you're ready to go. It works very well. Just with the hot dogs, don't cast, you know, too aggressively with it because it's a softer meat. You know, when that weight slingshots forward, it could rip the hook out. So, you know, a nice even cast out there. You're lobbing it out there. A little different when it comes to fishing with chicken breast. I recommend using Jell-O with the chicken breast because the longer it's in there, the better it gets. It not only, you know, sucks all the moisture out of the chicken itself, it gives it this bright fluorescent color. Like that piece right there, we were able to cut through it and the entire inside was dyed bright red. And it smelled a lot like strawberries or whatever flavor we were using that day. You know, it works very well and it stays on the hook. It's really tough. Just one thing to consider when it comes to using a chicken like that, because I don't want anybody to get sick when you're handling raw chicken in general. Try not to touch your face because you can probably get very sick from doing that. I'm always very careful, but I don't want anybody to get salmonella accidentally by going fishing and like touching their eyes, you know, picking their nose, you know, getting stuff out of their teeth. You know, just something to be mindful of. Channel cats are not picky eaters. Dough bait, dip bait. You know, there's a huge variety of differences we can use. We even have bottom of this bag. This is something that's been around a while. This is called Zote. I don't know if has anybody here heard that soap works for catfish, like ivory soap? Okay. So amongst the catfish community, Zote, this is Mexican laundry soap. It's in a bar. The reason why it works, it's scented with citronella and it's rendered with animal lard. It stays on the hook very well. I've caught a few fish with it. I keep it around more for a keepsake than anything. But don't be afraid to try that goofy stuff too. If you have it, there's a good chance the catfish will eat it. I've heard of catfish eating Slim Jims. You know, if they eat soap and hot dogs and, you know, like scented dough, they're not picky eaters. They're the furthest thing from it. Next slide, please. Natural baits. The only one I didn't include on here was chicken liver. I don't fish with chicken liver a whole lot. It works, it's just very, very soft. You gotta tie a special knot to keep it on the hook a little bit better. I'll use worms from time to time. When the water's cold, you know, in December and January when there's a shad kill, I will walk around the reservoir or the rivers and pick up, you know, a bag of shad. And, you know, I'm gonna keep them in the freezer, and come May, I'm gonna be a very happy camper to have those. Once they thaw, oh, it's like catfish crack. It gets them going. Cut them in half, trim the fins, you know, serve them as cut bait, like in that bottom picture there. Raw shrimp works very well too. You could also doctor that up with Kool-Aid or added catfish scent. Potski makes a recipe. It's called catfish nectar. It works very good. Team Catfish also makes a spray. It's called the Dead Red Spray. Let's say if we don't have a whole lot of bait and maybe we want to add a little bit of special sauce to our shrimp or the last few of our shad pieces. If it's out there for a bit, you can bring it back to life by giving it a little bit of extra scent there. Larger channel catfish, especially those magnum ones we talked about earlier, they tend, in my opinion, to favor the natural stuff, especially when it comes to like shad or even a live bluegill. Channel cats will eat live bait too. I've caught some of them on shrimp. I've caught them on a lot of different things, but when I'm targeting the larger ones, I'm generally using natural fish-oriented baits like that. Not so much the soap or a dough bait or a dip bait or anything like that. Everything works, just some things work better at different times. Turkey gizzards? I've caught some fish with turkey gizzards. A lot of people don't like them. You just got to know what to do with them. You can sauce them up with, you know, blood scent infusion, or you can dye them with the jello. Cool thing with the turkey gizzard is they're very, very tough. It's a very dense, dark meat that stays on the hook very well. I've caught some fish with it, not a ton. Some people don't like them. I think they're okay. But if you're at the grocery store and you see like, you know, cuts of, you know, whatever organs or like liver or beef tongue or gizzard, give it a shot. It probably works as long as it stays on the hook and it has a little bit of scent to it. You know, that's what gets the fish going. Next slide, please. Now we're going to talk about one of my favorite things, the flathead catfish. These are larger. These are more elusive than channel cats. The Michigan state record flathead catfish is 53 pounds that was caught out of the St. Joe River in 2002. That record's beaten kind of often. Not every year, but you know, every couple of years somebody catches one that's either bigger or close to it, or maybe they caught it and they released it because they didn't want to keep it around for the DNR to verify it. A lot of good people in the catfish community that do that sort of stuff. They know those fish are out there. I've heard some legends where I'm from, you know, 53 pounds, there are much bigger flatheads out there than that. Just the thing is, the whole tributary isn't going to have a whole lot of them. They're not going to eat very often, and they're going to be very specific on their bait. If a very large catfish is going to eat, he's going to eat once, and he's going to eat maybe a 5-pound carp at a time, and then he'll be good for a couple of weeks. You know, catching bigger fish, you got to have something we think of as the monster hunting mentality. You're not going out there catching a stringer full for dinner. You're going out there, you know, searching for a big one. And you're not going to catch one every single time. That's just how it goes. I struck out for a long time before I caught my first one. Then even longer before I caught my first big flathead. Right here, I caught this one 4 years ago. That was almost 40 pounds. That one was a long time coming. This is my friend Cam. We were down in Tennessee a few years ago. That one weighed about 65 pounds. And then here's Andy right over there. That one went 36, somewhere in the mid-upper 30s like that. You don't catch big fish like that every single day, but when you do, it makes the season. You got your big one, you got your pictures with it. Like heck, I haven't caught a big one since this day 4 years ago. I've caught some nice ones, but what I say is a nice flathead might be smaller, or might be a huge fish compared to other people. Hopefully this year I'll break further into the 40-pound mark, but that's it. It takes time on the water, and you got to be in the right location. So this one was in northern Ohio on the Maumee River. This one was down in Tennessee on Watts Bar Lake, and this one was in southeast Michigan as well. You got to be in the right places for them. Your giant fish, they're not going to be in very skinny, naked creeks like that picture I shared earlier where I had the channel catfish in the farm field. They're going to be, we're going to get into the details. Next slide, please. Flatheads have giant mouths. They're built to ambush their prey. It's just how they are. This is, no offense, Andy, one of the smallest flatheads I've ever seen. But you can put a softball in its mouth. That fish might have been 5 pounds, but he could put a whole bluegill the size of my hand in its mouth along with an 8 or 10 out hook. The one in the middle, we could have put a basketball in his mouth. That's also, a 60-plus pound fish. A more average or common sized flathead, far right, that's my old college roommate, John. That fish went in the mid-20s. You would have needed like 3 hands to go across the jaw. Just so, they have giant mouths, it's how they're built. So if you think, is this bait too big? Think again, because if even the smaller ones, you'll catch them smashing up on baits, and maybe you'll hook them sometimes and think, dang, this thing had the guts to hit that. They're hungry. It's what they do. They're fierce. They're competitors. They're trying to get big. They don't belong to a school or a pack. They're on their own trying to do their thing. They're very independent fishes. Next slide, please. The number one factor for success, not only time on the water, but the experience and the know-how, knowing when and where to strike. This one was in Ohio. We were fishing a part where a smaller river met a big river. So like I said earlier, the contour differences. This one here, we were fishing right up against some really, really nasty snags and logs. So, and then there, that's my buddy Tyler. He had a double header. We were relating to contour that day for fish to come out of the depths and come up really, really, really shallow, looking for their next meal. On the far right, in some southern bodies of water, not so much in Michigan, fishing real deep, suspending your baits early in the morning, along when the bait fish are moving around, that's how we got that one done. That was also down in Tennessee on Watts Bar Lake, but that's a very unique situation that has a natural herring population that suspends. And to be quite honest with you, when we went down on that trip, I wouldn't have gone out and done that. We went with a captain who had a lifetime of experience out there, who drove us out into 60, 70 feet of water, and then he said, you're going to let your baits go to the bottom, then you're going to reel them up 3 times. And that's that. I would have found something else, found something around shore. The entire shoreline looked really, really good. But knowing your body of water, spending time on the water, that's a big thing. Does anybody recognize that bridge in the background? Okay. Yeah. There's a hole underneath that bridge. There's a lot of stuff right there. The current picks up a little bit. And in that town, they've got a wing dam. So the water flows a little bit better. Fish are allowed to come up further. There's this concept of dead water. A lot of your lake and river can look really, really good, but will a fish be hanging out around there? Well, you got to spend some time there to figure it out. Look for little variations where it's deeper. Look for things to relate and fish around. Especially when it comes to depth. When you're casting out, keep this in mind. How long does it take for this sinker to hit the bottom? If it's 2 seconds or 3 seconds, okay, that's pretty shallow. But then if it's like 8 or 9 seconds, okay, this one's kind of deep. Keep that in mind, the little differences. If we're fishing in this river and boom, it's really shallow, our baits are almost instantly hitting the bottom, okay? We're gonna have to look for something a little different. We go to a creek mouth, or maybe we find some rapids where our sinker maybe takes 4 or 5 seconds to hit the bottom. Okay, we found a different spot for them. If I was a fish, this is where I would be. Maybe not as deep as I would like, but that's where they're gonna be. Next slide, please. Relating to structure, going off of what I've been saying here, this one was related to, these two were related to contour when it comes to whether it be sitting down in a hole, going shallow to feed, or sitting right in the crotch of an old tree. Flatheads love hanging out. They don't just sit out in the open. They're very solitary creatures. If this room was flooded and a flathead was hanging out here, he'd probably be hanging out under the table or in the midst of the chairs here. He just wouldn't be sitting out here in the open. So look for those sort of differences and irregularities out on the water. They all have one thing in common, and that's related to structure. And flatheads, I tell people they're earned, they're not given. You might not go out the first time and catch one. I went out a couple of times before I caught my first one. There have been seasons where I've caught maybe 2 of them. It just happens you have to put your time on the water. Do we recognize that trail there? Okay. Anybody recognize that spot? Okay. Yeah, a lot of good ones there. What did that one weigh, Tyler?
I think that one was only about 23.
That's a good one though. Very healthy fish. Then Mike's went about that. It was fun.
It was chunky.
Yeah, they're all good. They're all good. Next slide, please. Monster hunting mentality, it's not a numbers game. Gosh.
Yeah, we put in some work.
Yeah, that one went in the mid-30s. I took that picture.
Yeah.
And then, so here's the thing. This is Bob. He let us take his boat out, and we started catching these. He's like, well, I want to go. But his boat's a little small. And I'm like, okay, I'll get you some bait, and you can take Bob out, Andy. And he catches that one, and I think, damn, I wish I was there to just see it. That's a big one. And then the next year, Andy took his girlfriend, Brittany, out, and she caught that one that was in the mid-30s. They sat out there a while to catch those fish. Sometimes a few hours. You see how dark it is in the background. When it comes to flatheads, sometimes you gotta wait for them. And there's almost this mind game that comes with it too, where you think, okay, we just set up, maybe it's gonna happen soon. And, okay, maybe midnight will hit and things will happen. And we're gonna get into a little bit of the mentality of chasing big fish like this. Because if you don't stay on top of it, it can bite you in the butt. Sometimes it'll be 4 in the morning and we're on the boat and we're thinking, oh, I hope they come around at sunrise, because we've been sitting out here for 10 hours and I'm starting to get bored and we gotta drive the boat back and I'm really tired. So just being aware of that thing, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. Sometimes you gotta sit out there, but if you only have 4 hours, it's better to go than not to go. At least you can get in the early morning or into the evening. Just get your baits out there and wait. Gosh, those are some nice fish. Now, amongst all those 3 fish, all of those probably together weighed maybe like 110 pounds, 120 pounds between the 3 of them. Those are good ones. And with flatheads, when they fight, it's not over easy. They'll come to the boat, and then, round 2 begins. They've got these big, powerful tails, and they throw their body. They'll come up and see the boat, and they'll see the leader, and then they're going back down and doing their thing. Next slide. When it comes to your flathead baits, if it's not moving, you're not grooving. Earlier in this seminar, I shared a little bit about the anatomy between channel and flathead catfish, where the channel will pick dead stuff up off of the bottom, while the flathead, they have that protruding jaw. where, it's easy for them to swallow and ambush stuff. It's much harder for a flathead to pick something up off of the bottom. I'm not saying it can't be done, because there are places where they do it more often than in others, in my opinion. But it doesn't have to be alive. People think, oh, if it's got to be moving, it's got to be alive. And we'll get into talking about rigging when it comes to flatheads in a little bit here. But natural baits, like a live bluegill on an 8 or 10 aught hook, sometimes a 5 aught hook, a live bullhead. I'll put a live bullhead, even a 14, 15-inch bullhead, on sometimes a double hook rig. I don't have any of those tied up. That's a very once in a while situation. Or I'll use something else I can catch, like a creek chub or a pike minnow, something that's different. Because flatheads, like other fish, can be very picky. My theory with the bullhead is, and from what I've read, especially coming off of the spawn in the summer, early summertime, a bullhead will come into a flathead's nest and eat all the eggs and raid it, along with a pike minnow like that, a creek chub. So those fish might not be necessarily eating the bait or striking the bait to eat it. They might be hitting the bait to kill it, to protect their eggs or their fry. Flatheads can be picky, like I said. I've had some days where we're fishing with bluegills, and then I made the switch and I put on a creek chub like that, put it in the same area, and caught them 10 minutes later. Maybe not even that. Small differences can make the world of a change. And we have the cut bait picture up there, because your cut bait doesn't have to be sitting on the bottom. We can float fish with big bobber rigs for them, keep that bait off the ground. That fish doesn't know if your bait's alive or not. As long as it's moving and he's able to get it, he's going to go for it. So we have, your standard like float rig. We got a rattle on here. I'll talk a little bit about that before we get done there. Bobbers work very well if there's little wind or if you're fishing from a boat. If it's windy and you're on the lake or the riverbank, every couple of minutes you're going to have to recast, because that float's going to be drifting around. Or to get your cut bait off the bottom for flatheads, this is something called a Santee Cooper rig, where you can use any kind of sinker you want. This is a dragging sinker I'll pull behind the boat. Catfishing can be as technical or as basic as you want it to be. Where on the inside here, this looks a lot like a bass bait, like a head and zero spook. It floats. It's got a little bit of rattle to it. This is going to keep your bait off of the bottom and serve as a dinner bell, where that piece of cut bait's floating behind it, doing its thing, and that rattle's calling them in. Maybe you're moving around, maybe you're stationary behind the boat, and it's floating up off of the bottom. It works preferably better if you've got at least a little bit of current, or if you're moving. If you're stationary, sometimes it can sway around a little bit. Now, this is a Santee Cooper rig. We'll go over this towards the end of the seminar. But getting the bait off of the bottom is important. Getting your cut bait off of the bottom is important when it comes to targeting flatheads. Just because, like I said earlier, their mouths, it's harder for them to pick stuff up off of the bottom. They can do it, and I've seen it done, but you are far much more likely off better just getting it off the bottom, so you can get underneath it and think, oh, this piece of shad is all bloody and moving around, and I can hear them coming. So I'm going to go up there, I'm going to swipe it, and then we're going to reel it in. So live baits or something that's at least moving. Next slide, please. Hooks or tackle. Your rods, your medium heavy, too heavy. Pull this one out here. Now there are a lot of, the catfish industry has exploded over the past decade or so. We're seeing a lot more custom rods built for it. And it makes me very, very happy and honored to be a part of the industry, seeing this sort of stuff come out. Where when I was a kid, we couldn't dream of, rods that glue in blacklight like that, or, specific circle hooks. Circle hooks originated in saltwater situations, where, you let them take the bait, and then after a while, you reel into them. For a rod, what I was saying, because we're seeing changes in development in rod technology, rods aren't made out of e-glass anymore that are stiff and strong. This is a composite rod by Slime Cat. This rod is unbreakable. We saw these demonstrated at Catfish conference in Kentucky a few years ago, and they had them tied to the wall, and you could pull back on them as hard as you could, and they're not going to break. It's very strong material, all stainless steel eyelets. These rods could take a beating. I could drop this on the ground, I could drag this through wherever, and it's going to hold up. It's not your typical, I don't know, $15 combo. This is designed to get the job done. Your reel, it could be a casting reel like this, or a spinning reel like this. So of the crowd here, what do we prefer, the spinning or the casting reels? You're a spinning guy? Okay. How about you?
Spin.
You're a spinning guy, and how about you?
Oh, casting.
You're casting. Okay. Now, when you're targeting flatheads, this goes a little bit with channel catfish too. You want something with a strong gear ratio. So you're going to be able to muscle them out of wherever they're hanging out at. You want something with a bait runner. Something that's a clicker, as they call it. So on the side of your casting reels, there's often a toggle switch. Where on this Abu Garcia, I slide it down, and when I have let's say I've got a bluegill on the end of this hook, and he's anchored down pretty good with this sinker. When a fish hits it, I can be far away and I'm going to hear that he's dumping line. And I'm going to give it to him, because if he can't pull on it, or if he can't move with it, and that rod starts to load up, that flathead will spit it. They're very wary. You got to give it to them a little bit. Sometimes they'll grab your bait and just swim around with it, with the entire bait besides the hook, just chill in their mouth. And you'll reel in let's say you're fishing with a bluegill, you reel it in, and you'll see a strip, where the scales are worn off, and where that fish chomped down on it and just started to move with it a little bit. They can be fussy. Sometimes, you'll see where your line is positioned out in the water, and they move it very, 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 very slowly. In 20 minutes, you look over at it. Did I cast over there? Why is there so much slack in the line? I don't remember that being over by the boat, and they're moving with it. Then you got to make a tough choice. Do I give it to him some more? How long has he had it, or do I just reel into him, because things are about to get intense? Strong drag, the bait runner option, spinning rods or spinning reels often also have bait runner options, but not so much clickers. This is an Okuma Avenger with the bait runner option on the back. This is very, very smooth. It's very, very fluid. Lets the fish take the line. And then once, put that in there. Once we're ready to give it to them, whether it be the spinning reel or the casting reel, I'm just going to kind of get in my pocket here. And when I reel, it's going to lock from the rear drag to the front drag. So he's able to pull line, then once I start reeling, he can't. He's torqued down, and you're going to be able to catch up to him and either set the hook or sink the point down into it. With line, I use at least a 50-pound braid. Sometimes I put a little bit more shoulders into these fish than I probably should have. But those fish will grab the bait, sometimes be hooked, and then try to go back under a stump or around a log or underneath a piece of concrete. So you're going to have to put that rod into your waist and reel and pull. We're using this kind of tackle for a reason. It gets the job done the best. Some people just like fishing mono, and there's nothing wrong with that. The thing is with mono, it stretches a little bit. So if you're reeling into them, give it a few extra pumps so that stretch allows, that hook point to penetrate into the fish's mouth. Hooks, it's a big deal, literally. 5/0 to 10/0. I know 10 sounds big, but even the smaller ones we showed pictures of earlier, those fish will hit them. This picture right here, that hook's, takes up a good portion of the size of my hand. That's an 8/0 Team Catfish hybrid circle hook. Now, I got one of those on here. A hybrid circle hook, it's rounded around where the point is towards the shank of the hook. You can either set this hook or you can reel into them. That's why they call it a hybrid. A traditional circle hook that has much more of a rounded bend, don't set that. you just reel in with the traditional circle hooks. That's a very, very big thing because, especially with flatheads, I don't recommend using a traditional like rounded circle hook because their mouths are flat. A channel catfish mouth is kind of round and it's easier to catch the corner of their mouth or their jaw with a regular rounded bend circle hook. But with a flathead, because their mouths are flat, a hybrid circle hook like that, a kale hook does a good job at reaching. And there's a rule when it comes to the kale hook. Where it lays is where it stays. There's kale hook right there for those who can see it. It's got an offset point. These things are really good at snagging and being hung up in rocks and timber and that sort of cover. But they do a very good job with their design. Once the flathead hits your bait, this hook point will reach back into the cheek, into the meat, and the gristle, and get a real good hookup into that fish when he bites it. So, and your typical J hooks work very well for flathead fishing too. If you want to play Bassmaster and just set it into them, you'll be able to do that with a J hook. But I think next slide, please. I think your kale hooks and your hybrid circle hooks, that's what I go for most of the time. Using the right equipment. Do you want hits? Do you want to catch these fish? Or do you want hits? Do you want to hook up? Or do you want to actually land them? Using the right tools is very important. Doing anything in life, whether we're renovating a bathroom, we're not going to use some cheap Big Lots handyman tool set. We're going to use real power tools. And we see in these photos, that hybrid circle hook, you caught them right where that hook was designed to catch them. Or with that kale hook, right underneath the jaw, one of the many places that could sink into. Those fish weren't going anywhere. When you're hooked up to a flathead, it is kind of a rare instance you lose them, in my experience. You just got to use the right equipment, give it to them. It comes with time and experience on the water, but I wanted to highlight that. Don't bring a knife to a gunfight. If you're targeting some good-sized fish and you're using 10-pound line and small hooks, and you hook up to one if you're lucky and you lose it, well, you can't necessarily be surprised. So go in, be ready. Highly recommend stuff. And like I said earlier about them not being line shy, there's green line, there's green line. They don't matter. One of the cool things about flatheads. Next slide. I'll explain that a bit. Actually, I'll explain that right now. So, depending where a flathead is living, if they are hanging out in muddy, shallower areas, they'll turn into like a mustardy brown color like that. But if they're hanging out in wood, and for a lot of their life, they camouflage. Because they're very much ambush predators, they're camouflaged naturally. Ones living in timber might resemble granite or like a rocky gray color, if you will. So we got that one Bob caught. That's pretty like yellow mustard color, and the one on the right there. Both of those, all those three fish were caught on the Saginaw. It's just something cool I like about catfish. Where you're pulling them out of it's when you get up and close to them, like, oh, this looks like the same color and tone as a real nice marble countertop, or this looks like Dijon mustard, or whatever. Small but major differences on this side. Pay attention when you're out on the water. Sometimes the wind will change. Sometimes the clouds will peel off and the moon will shine. Sometimes the current might drop a little bit. Sometimes it might pick up. Sometimes in that far picture, a barge will go by on these larger rivers. I don't exactly know what that does, but it gets the fish going. Whether it churns the bottom, whether it cuts up bait fish, or sends them into a shock, or if the fish just think, oh, it's going by, we might as well eat now. It's our reminder to eat or whatever. I took that picture for that reason. And not 15 minutes later, I caught that channel catfish, and then I caught a flathead probably another 5 minutes later. But the 6 hours before that barge went by, it was absolutely dead. Was it the barge? I don't know. Or that night, it could have been the moon, because the clouds started to clear up and it got very bright out there. The moon was, nice and shining through. And that happened all between 2:30 and 3 o'clock in the morning. So pay attention when you're out there. It's the subtleties and the little differences. And sometimes when you're going out, you're targeting flatheads or cats in general, especially the bigger ones. If you're going to catch 2 of them, you're more likely to catch both of them around the same time, almost like they just know it's time to cruise through wherever and eat something. At least in my experience, that's what I found. So pay attention to little things that are going on. Next slide, please. Rattles. I'm sure we've all used baits that rattle when it comes to targeting walleye or bass, like a lipless crankbait or a jig spoon or something. I wasn't much of a rattle guy for a long time. But now when I go out, there's something about a rattle. They hear it, they feel it, it's going around, that fish is swimming, you're down there or moving and that rattle's doing its thing. It calls them in, it's like a dinner bell. When I started warming up to using rattles, I would put one out there. And for a while, it seemed like the one that was going to get hit was the fish with the rattle. Then I started putting 2 of them out there with rattles. And now I run all rattles all the time. I don't believe it's a thing that can hurt your chances on the water. It's just, something relatively new when it comes to targeting catfish. Now this goes for both channel catfish and flathead catfish. Up here we have the original Versa rattle by Whisker Seeker. Those are the ones I have tied on here. They just slide onto your line and they spin around and they rattle. Then they also have the 2.0s where they've got those angled wings on them. So those work really well when you're moving or sitting in current, where they're spinning around your line and there's little rattles on the inside that are moving as well. So that's a component. If you don't have any rattles, I have some to give away today. I recommend giving them a try if you're not a believer or if you're not seasoned with them at all. It can make a big difference. Next slide, please. Sinkers, this is all pretty basic. If you're going to be fishing different spots and you're going to be changing out your sinker sizes, you can use a sinker slide, like in that photo. It's just a clip. If maybe our 3s aren't sticking and we need to bump it up to a 4, that gives you the option of being able to do that. Otherwise, sometimes, for the most part in Michigan, you can get by with a 3-ounce sinker. And if you're using an inline like egg sinker or a no-roll, that would be a good option too. I've got a no-roll rigged up over here on the slime cap. All sinkers do the same job. Some of them do the job better. Before I ever had no-roll sinkers, you look at the no-roll, it's called that because it won't roll down the river. The current will go over the flat side of the sinker. If you're fishing in current, especially from shore or out into current, an egg sinker will tumble down and it won't set where you casted it to. A no-roll, it might set a little bit, but it's going to lock down and the current's going to roll over it. It's not going to be pushing your sinker. Pyramid sinkers work well for catching into soft bottom, like sand and mud. Coin sinkers, they lay flat as well. It's a lot of it's a matter of preference. Some people prefer not having sinkers on your rods when you're transporting, for fear that they're going to beat your rod up or something like that. It's like I'm dribbling a basketball. But these rods are tough. If anybody needs any sinkers, I have some to give away as well. Just they all have their time and place. Some work better than others in different situations. And another component when it comes to rigging, I'm not just putting the sinker on the line and then tying to a swivel. I'm going to put a bead or a rubber bumper there. That way, whenever that sinker comes down here, when I'm reeling it in or moving it, it protects the knot. Because this is just braid. After so long of me doing this and smashing down on the knot, it's going to fray, it's going to weaken. And you don't want to be in that predicament when you're hooked up to a real nice fish. So, sinkers. Next slide. Wrapping up here, rigging option. your basic Carolina rig, your sinker, going to your swivel, to your leader, and then your hook, or the Cooper rig I talked about earlier that floats your bait off of the bottom. You know, just a big thing, knowing what you're using and how to use it, like the kind of sinker or the size of your hook or the bait you're using. Another note about flatheads that I wanted to share when it comes to the swivel. I don't use the same swivel all the time amongst catfish. Your regular ones you can buy anywhere for channel cats will work for channel cats. But I use these much bigger ones that are rated for saltwater fishing for flatheads. These break at like 300 pounds or so. I don't want to take any chances if I'm hooked up to a very large fish, or if I'm hung up and I need to pull a fish out, I got to put some muscle into them. You know, sometimes there are technical errors, little things happen. Your regular swivels will give out, but not when you're targeting larger fish. I want everything going my way. Cooper rig works best in current. There's that as far as rigs. Next slide, please. And then this is a zero rig. I have one of these tied up on this Catfish Pro setup here. Now, I do my zero rigs a little bit different. I put them on a tether or a leash. We call it a zero rig because there's no leader. This works for channels and flatheads around areas where it's very snaggy. You know, you don't want to lose your entire rig. You know, because if you got a real long leader, you got a lot of area for error to happen. Whether your bluegill wraps itself up in a tree branch or you get hung up around some concrete, this is a zero rig. You can put it down, you know, right on their doorstep and deliver it to them without having to worry about getting hung up. I put a swivel and like a tether on mine, so that way when I'm casting, that sinker never gets too far away from the hook, because sometimes in the past, I've casted it out there, and that sinker, you know, separates itself, sometimes maybe 8 or 10 feet away from the hook. This way, it keeps it all together. You don't make a bigger problem than what's intended when it comes to putting your bait in sticky situations. I've put this in very, very dicey areas and caught fish before, just because that's, you know, that's how you got to deliver it to them. Put it right in front of the stump, right on their doorstep. I'm not going to lose them. And, you know, like I said earlier, they're not line shy. They don't know the difference between a rock and this sinker. And then that way, if this sinker's on the bottom, and whether we're using cut bait or a live bluegill, you know, that bluegill's not going to have a whole lot to work with. He's going to be around there. It's not going to give him the opportunity to really wrap up around something or get caught. You know, be a hero, use the zero rig. This is something I use quite a bit, you know, for all of my catfish purposes, but this shines when it comes to real snaggy situations. Next slide, please. Thanks to everybody who came out. It's a good show. I hope everybody learned something. I'd like to thank you all, Whisker Seeker and Catfish Pro Base, for donating some goods. Then to Andy, Sarah, Cam, Bob, Brittany, Mike, Zane, Tyler, and Dennis for the photos and the encouragement and giving me the insight. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of Outdoorama, but I'll be hanging around, giving away some prizes and taking questions if anybody has anything.
What's your go-to rig on the hallway?
Oh, okay. I'll just use a regular slip rig. If I'm upriver and it's like very snaggy area, I'll use the zero rig. But like if I'm fishing the main lake or around the dam, you know, I can get by with something like this. They don't have too much current out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you know the holloway. That's a good spot. Yeah.
We're going to do some bobber around shop.
Yeah. And there's a lot of opportunity out. There's a lot of great shore fishing opportunity on the Holloway. A lot of people use bobbers. You know, let it drift around a little bit. You know, if you can get that going for you, and it'll move around. Caught a lot of float fishing out there, and just using regular slip rigs. You can drift out there with walking sinkers and Cooper rigs like this, but I don't get my boat out there too often. But yeah, most of the time I'm just using a regular Carolina rig on the Holloway. Alrighty, I think we're about time. I'll be around if anybody has any questions, but thanks for having me, folks. For everybody who tuned in on the internet, thank you so much. We'll be back again tomorrow.